All right. Welcome, everybody. Looking at my clock, it looks like it is time for us to go ahead and start. It does look like there are several dozen people still rolling into the meeting, so I guess I'll just start with some housekeeping. First off, who is this crazy voice speaking to you through your computer speakers? Well, this is Mike Hamilton. For those who haven't seen my presentations before, I am one of the founding members here at MadCap Software, so I go all the way back to the very beginning. And then just a bit of my background, I'm also kind of a strange bird to be either in software or in technical writing. My education is actually in physics, of all things, but I found out way back in the 1980s, yes, I'm that old, that when you work at a nuclear power plant, but you happen to be the one that complains the loudest about how horrible the reactor plant operation manuals are, guess what? You just volunteered to run the technical publications library. And that sent me skittering off in a whole new career direction. I got heavily involved in technical editing of procedural information at a nuclear power plant. But nuclear power being oh so popular, I got tired of crossing picket lines to get to work. So then I transitioned over into the semiconductor world, where I could use my physics training, but in more of a politically correct environment. But that's when I truly got deeply involved with the technical writing umbrella. I became an instructional designer. I was writing training curriculum to teach field service engineers how to operate and maintain a lot of the equipment used in the semiconductor world. And then I ended up in software because back in the 1990s, if anybody remembers good old Blue Sky Software, they headhunted me, brought me on board, and I, with a partner, we co-wrote the original certified RoboHelp training curriculum. Then I went on to become the RoboHelp product manager, and I ran the entire RoboHelp program from, 1997 until 2005. And that was after, the whole Macromedia debacle. And after Macromedia fired everybody, I then became one of the founders over here at MadCap. So that's how this crazy physics guy not only ends up in technical writing, but ends up in the software side of technical writing. All right. And I think that introduction was enough of a stall tactic. The people rolling into this virtual meeting room has a bit. So I think I achieved my goal there. Welcome, everybody. All right. So our official webinar for today. This is actually a reprise. We did this webinar once last month, but because of the global pandemic and just the luck of the draw, I'm actually doing this from my home. 3 doors down the street from me is an elementary school. And the day we tried to do this webinar last month was the very day that that school decided to do virtual classrooms over Zoom. And it just happened to the exact moment we started the webinar was the exact moment they did that. And they just swamped the internet bandwidth for this whole area. So we apologize. There were technical issues with that webinar. I did end up doing a short-term recording that we could get up. That was just basically me giving the webinar again, just into a blank microphone. So we did get that up temporarily, but we've rescheduled. So that way, if you guys have live questions, you're more than welcome to answer those. So now that we do have proper bandwidth, this will be the second time we do this presentation. And this presentation is long-winded title, Preparing Your Team for Success. How do we do remote documentation and streamlined workflows? And if you read between the lines there, it's like, hey, it's a pandemic. We're working from home. How do we still keep a cohesive team authoring environment? And that's really what the whole goal of this webinar is about. If it's a distributed team, if you can't just, pop down a cube or two and ask a question, how do we still work efficiently? So that's the overarching plan for today. Now, as I was developing this, though, the more research I did, that really kind of broke down into multiple categories. And before I go into those categories, though, some final housekeeping, because this always comes up. Yes, this webinar will be recorded. So anybody who signed up, if you view live, great. If you didn't view live, that's fine too. Everybody who signed up will get an email with a link to the recording. You can even download the slide deck that I'm using if you want to. And at any point during this presentation, if you want to ask a question, you are more than welcome to. Now, your phones are muted. That's to protect your privacy and to keep the background noise down. So how can you ask questions? Well, there is a question and answer panel that is part of this GoToWebinar software. So at any time, just type your question in that question and answer panel. I do have that up on a second monitor so I can see those questions as they pop in. All right, so that's enough housekeeping. But as I said, as I was preparing for this session, all of my recommendations, all of the techniques, they really kind of started to distill down into three major categories. And the first one, it's going to sound like, yeah, the horse is already out of the barn on this one kind of a thing, but it's still kind of important. There are some best practices, if at all possible, you want to have in place before the team starts working remotely. Now, obviously, in this case, we've been working remotely for weeks now, but you can always kind of back into these techniques. But what I'm going to go over in this first section is if you don't have these fundamentals in place, then the whole remote working environment is going to be a bit of a challenge. So even if you have to back into these best practices, it's definitely something worth looking at. Once we have all the best practices in place, then what are some recommendations for the actual live workflow? How do we do co-authoring? How do we do review process? How do we get things approved? How do we assign tasks? So the whole second section, I'll be looking at the more kind of real-time aspects. And then the part everybody seems to forget, the third section, once this is all up and running, how do we measure it? How do we make sure that this distributed workflow is actually working and everybody's happy and productive with it? So those are the big three sections I plan to look at. And I also just realized I probably should do a sanity check here and make sure I'm not just talking to myself. So if you are hearing my voice and you are seeing a slide that says agenda, do me a favor. Just give me a quick yes in the chat window. Okay, somebody's been to my sessions before. They actually typed in yes before I asked them to. They knew where I was going. All right, so I am broadcasting and all is well. Excellent. So the first section, best practices. Now, how are we going to set this up? Well, there's just certain things that if you don't have them set up in advance, it is going to make things a bit of a challenge. And I've even broken this into some subsections. So the first thing I would say, and this might sound silly, but have a style guide. And this has been kind of an eye-opener to me. 17 years ago, I would go on site. And pretty much every time I would go on site to a customer location, they would talk about their style guide. They all had them, they all used them. And I'm not sure what has changed, because now when I go on site, I would say maybe 40% of the time does a team actually have a style guide. The majority of the time, they're just kind of flying by the seat of their pants. So we're going to go in a little more detail. What do I mean by a style guide? Why should you have one? And it's really critical, especially with a distributed team. The second thing I will recommend is if you're still using the templates that are provided by MadCap software, that's a big red flag. That's a problem. And it's not that our templates are bad or anything. It's just they were intended to kind of get you over that initial learning curve. If you're using our templates in the first few weeks, hey, that's what they're there for. But once you've been using Flare for 2 or 3 months, by then you should have developed your own custom templates. So I'll be touching more on that process. What does it entail? How would you go about that? The other thing, and here's where the Flare software almost makes this too easy. All of your single source attributes, your conditional markers, your variables, you actually want those set relatively in stone in advance. You don't want individual writers just randomly creating new metadata whenever they need it or whenever they think they want to. Down that road is disaster. And we'll explain more deeply what I mean by that. And then finally, especially with distributed teams, it's really easy to get in kind of a little vacuum, a little bubble, and kind of lose track to what all of your other team members are doing. And especially if you're the team lead or the manager, how do we keep control on this chaos if we can't just, pop down the hallway and ask somebody a question? So those are the 4 areas that I would think of as being critical to initial setup or best practices, preferably before the team even starts working remotely. But if they're already working remotely, we should scramble as quickly as we can to get these 4 key pieces in place. So the first key piece was that style guide. And again, I will reiterate, it's critical. You must have one. Now, what am I talking about there? Well, a lot of people think that's talking about what fonts to use or what your team's decision is about do we or do we not use the serial comma. And yes, that's part of it, but that's a minor part. Your style guide is really the guidance any individual author might need on any of those, gazillion little day-to-day questions they might have. I mean, how do we guarantee a consistent look and feel when procedures are written by 14 different authors? That's the purpose of the style guide. So obviously it should include your group's linguistic rules. Avoid passive voice, use of the serial comma. One of my pet peeves, how to describe screen interactions. And I realize I'm being a bit nitpicky here, but nothing drives me crazier than going on site, seeing some customers' docs, and half the team is writing from the file menu, choose save. And the other half of the team is writing choose save from the file menu. And I realize in English it means the exact same thing, whether you do location action or you do action location. It's just not consistent. It's not professional. And especially if you have to pay for translation or localization, just something that little can drive up your localization costs. So even things like screen interactions, how are we going to structure our sentences? All of that should be in the style guide. What are your look and feel rules? Your font usage, list styling, are root level unordered lists going to be standard bullets, and nested unordered lists, are they going to be circles or squares? Just little things like that, so that your lists look like the lists coming from any other author on the team. What are your table style rules? How do we make our header rows look for consistency? Use of company logos, use of product logos, all these things that a junior writer might mess up and get yelled at for. Well, to keep them from messing up in the first place, it should be in the style guide. And even things like navigation rules. Are we going to use breadcrumb trails? Are we going to go 4 levels deep, 3 levels deep? Are we going to be using like expanding text effects or drop-down text effects? Do we prefer one over the other? Are there certain use cases where we absolutely want them used and some use cases where we want them not to be used? So even navigation rules. And then note, and this is one of the things that might throw people a little bit, not only do you need to do all of this, but you need to do it multiple times. You might want to define, okay, here is our style guide for print publications, but then here is our style guide for browser-based publications, and here is our third style guide for publishing to mobile devices. Now, not every company wants to get to that level, but some do. And again, it's important to not only kind of put this down on paper to give the junior writer a chance, but all of our publishing outputs, we need to have those rules documented. And then the last on this page, team interaction rules. And that's kind of a weird one. That wouldn't traditionally be in a style guide. But if this is going to become your kind of single point of reference for the team rules, team interactions, just seems like this is a logical place to also add that. So I know some of our customers, they have an internal rule that says, hey, when you finish authoring a topic, you must push that into the database so the rest of the team has access to it. We have other customers that are like, yeah, it's not that critical. As long as you push into the database, you know, at the end of the workday, once per day is fine. We have other customers say, well, do it before lunch, do it before close of business, do it twice. Any one of those is a correct answer. The question is, what is the expectation on your team? And so even something like that, hey, when do I push up my edits? Just add that to the style guide. It's a nice, convenient place. All right, now, so those are my rules, my recommendations. And some of this you don't have to physically write, especially that first bullet where it says linguistic rules. A lot of folks will just point to an existing reference, you know, in accordance with Microsoft Manual of Style, in accordance with, you know, Chicago, in accordance with, there are several, especially when it comes to linguistic rules, established volumes out there you can just reference. But when it comes to things like look and feel and navigation rules, that's typically coming right out of your marketing department. And there needs to be one cohesive place where this can all be stored. All right, so now I'm going to transition over into Flare for a minute, just to share some techniques that I've seen some customers use that I thought were pretty cool. I saw one customer, they actually created a folder in their Flare project, and they named that folder Style Guide. And their thinking was, well, why make somebody have a separate reference somewhere? If they're working in their Flare project and they have a question, then right in the Flare project, we have stored the Style Guide. Now, what they did do to be on the safe side, though, is they did, now I didn't do it here in my little sample, but they did add a conditional marker. It was just the color black, and it was labeled never publish. and they applied that to their style guide folder. But then as we drill into that style guide folder, here are all the different types of things they documented. Hey, if you're going to use images, here are our rules on how we want images processed. If you're going to use lists, here's a topic, all the rules about using lists in our documentation. And this way it's all nice and handy right at the author's fingertips. Now, sometimes I share that and people get excited. They think, oh, that's a cool idea. And other times I share that and people just recoil in horror. Oh my gosh, that's way too dangerous. What if somebody accidentally published those topics into an output? Well, there's a lot of work that would kind of have to go into making that happen. I can't see that happening just by pure accident. But if that makes you nervous, I've seen other customers, they'll create their style guide like that, output it as a PDF, and then just put the PDF back into their Content Explorer. So now, again, it's a ready resource, but it's much less likely to get included in one of your builds. But both techniques, I've seen them done both ways, and I just thought they were both neat ways of keeping that style guide kind of right there at your fingertips. Question came into the chat window. Should each style guide be standalone for each output type? Not necessarily. For example, if I go into style guide here and it says lists, well, in this one topic, it could say for the web browser, root level unordered lists should be bullets and nested lists should be squares. However, for PDF, root level should be bullets and nested should be disks. There's nothing wrong with lumping it all together like that, as long as the author has the information that they need. So I don't mean you literally create 3 or 4 or 6 separate style guides, but your style guide resources should provide guidance for any of the scenarios that an author might find themselves trying to support. I hope that made sense. All right, so I probably put more time into that than I should have. Looking at the clock, yeah, because I've got to speed up here. All right, custom templates. And I'm really going to even break templates down into 2 groups. The first group, your topic templates. If we need consistent content, if we don't want it to look like it came from 10 different unique authors, then there is some setup we need to do in advance. And before we do anything, I recommend just look at your existing content. Do a content audit. For most of us, most written content is going to fall into 3 buckets. The content you write, it's typically either task or procedure based, or it's going to be overview or kind of domain knowledge. And then the third category is typically just reference information, lookup data. Those are always the 3 big buckets. So I always recommend that in your Flare project, you create a procedure template, an overview template, and a reference template. Now you're not limited to those 3. Now, if your content audit shows that you're also going to need a repair parts ordering type of topic, well, we could have a repair parts template. I mean, you can have as many as you need, but in my experience, those first 3 would kind of be the bare minimum. And that's the whole purpose of the audit. You should be able to identify kind of how many buckets your content filters into. Once we've done that audit, we use that information to then create the templates in Flare. And if you've never created Flare topic templates before, it might sound scary, but it's not at all. Again, I'll pull up a copy of Flare here real quick. And now that I have Flare up, well, here is where most people start. You know, they just go to the File tab and they select New, and there's this new topic template, but it's basically completely blank, and that's where everybody starts. Well, the problem if 10 different authors all try to write a complex procedure from a template that is this empty, the odds of them looking consistent are pretty slim. So what I would recommend before anybody does any authoring, the manager, you know, the team lead, whoever's in charge, depending on the size of the group, they should be the one that starts from that MadCap template, but then flesh out what a master procedure should look like. And this is, at this moment, this is just a normal topic. And I've gone in here, I've added the heading 1, I've added the various subheadings, I've pre-applied the correct style information, I've added this little kind of seed text telling the authors what to do, I've added a sign-off block at the bottom. Again, this is kind of ugly, but you can make it as pretty as you want. But here's the magic step. Once you're done fleshing out your template, don't just save it. Because if I save this as a topic, it's just another topic, big deal. The key is going up to the File tab, going into the Save area, and there is literally an option, Save as Template. So now, once I've done that, if anybody else on my team needs to create a new procedure in this case, they would say, okay, File New. But now forget those MadCap templates. I'm going to close those. Here I have that mic procedure template that I created. For file name, we'll call this webinar. And I'll click Add. So now it's like filling out a form. I literally just replace this seed text with my actual content, and I don't even have to apply any styles. The styles were already applied for me. But this now guarantees that the procedure that I write, it's going to have the exact same corporate look and feel as any of the procedures any of my colleagues write on the rest of the team. So if you haven't taken the time to flesh out your own topic templates, I would make that an immediate priority. It just makes that whole authoring much more consistent and much easier on the rest of the team. All right, so that was on the topic side. Once you have those in place, then you want to do the same thing on the publishing side. And we're having topic templates that give you the consistent content look and feel. Doing the publishing templates, the master pages, the page layout files, the skin files, well, that will give you the consistent branding, even if you have multiple people doing the builds. Question just came in the Q&A window. We usually just copy and paste a topic and change the text. Is there anything wrong with that? If there isn't anything wrong with that. It's just slower and it's more tedious. And I'd be a little bit worried it might be a little bit more error prone for a junior writer. But it still works. It's trying to think of an analogy. I don't know. I probably shouldn't. I'll just keep it simple. Yes, that will work, but that's just kind of the brute force method. Do I know of anybody doing software release notes in Flare? Oh, absolutely. And that could just be a fourth type of topic template. You could have a release notes template that, again, somebody just then fills out like a form, and they don't have to recreate that entire page from scratch every single release. I've seen topic templates used for training pages, procedure pages, reference pages, parts ordering pages. I'm drawing a blank. I've probably seen 6 or 7 other template types over the years. But that's why we kept it open. Every team is going to have their own unique needs. All right, but I do need to pick up some speed here. The clock is ticking away rapidly on me. So again, on the publishing side, I would recommend, and again, this is going to sound weird because this is the best practices before the team even starts category. Why would we need things like master pages and skin files? I know some customers, they want to wait to the very end of the process to even begin working on those. Well, this comes down to how Flare works. If you've set up your master pages well in advance, if you've set up things like your page layouts well in advance, that makes the authoring experience better. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, again, let me pull up a copy of Flare here. And you can even lump like style sheets into this category. So let's say I'm looking at a topic, but I'm not sure if that edit that I just made is going to work both in the web browser and in the PDF. Well, if somebody on the team has already created our page layout template, then all I have to do is go into my Flare editor, and where it says layout web, switch that to print layout. And now I can see instantly how that edit that I made is going to render when I publish the PDF. In this case, I can see the margins have changed, the fonts have changed, the text coloring has changed. The page numbering at the bottom is not going to exist on the web, but it will exist on the print side. So that's the big advantage. Rather than waiting until the end, if a lot of these publishing templates are set up in advance, that lets the author toggle back and forth because they might have to change how they make an edit. For example, let's say I get some giant screenshot from one of the engineers and I drop that in. All right, that's huge. That completely overwhelms this page, but maybe I can get away with that in a web browser. But if I switch my layout to print, row, at a moment's notice, I can see this is going to run right past my margin and right off the edge of the page. So again, that's why I recommend to have all of your publishing templates. I mean, maybe not perfect, but at least like 90% fleshed out before the writing even begins, because this way the authors can see if there's going to be any topic-based problems very early in the process. And that way we don't have a ton of QA work to do at the end when QA keeps rejecting our PDFs because images are getting chopped off. All right, but I'm getting long-winded here. Again, the whole thing was that I'm trying to communicate. Have all of your templates as early in the process as you can. It makes authoring better and less problematic, less Q&A fixes at the end of the process. All right, your single source attributes. Hold a virtual team meeting. Get all the stakeholders involved. Do some brainstorming. What metadata do we think we are going to need? Okay, we're producing 2 different variants of product. There's the standard product, there's the enterprise version of the product. we need to have conditional tags to identify both versions. Great, let's add that to the virtual whiteboard. We have some content that's going to go into print that won't go into the web browser. Okay, great, we need a tag called print only. But the reason you want to have that virtual brainstorming meeting is because you want to set a single file of, okay, here are all the conditional tags that we agree as a group that we are going to need. And then do the same exercise with variables. All right, we need a variable for the product name. We need a variable for the, company email address. We need a variable for this, for that. Set those relatively in stone. You do not want individual writers creating these on the fly. Because I have worked with customers where we get to the very end of an 8-month project just to find out that, well, at some point, Larry created a tag called print only. And then at some other point, Shelley created a tag named only in print, when she should have used Larry's print only tag. And then, Edward created a tag that was for PDF. And you end up, you've got like 19 conditional tags all trying to do the same thing. Or that's the perfect case. If they're all trying to do the same thing, at least we can kind of unwind that, though it's a lot of work. But where it's really ugly is when you get a tag that's not quite identical. So you can't just one-to-one substitute. It can turn into a mess. So that's what I say. Have that team meeting. Establish, here are the metadata tags that we are going to use. Now, you're not going to get it perfect. If during authoring somebody runs into a scenario where they have that moment of, oh man, we need a conditional marker for this that isn't available. Don't just create it on the fly. Shoot out a virtual team email. Say, hey, look, I ran into this use case. In my opinion, we need a new conditional marker named X. Does everybody concur? Because somebody might pop in and say, ooh, I can see that need, but I can also see this need over here. Let's call it Y and use it for both use case. It can really streamline the number of meta tags that you end up having, which in the end will make your publishing just so much easier. So have that team meeting, establish your metadata in advance. All right, now we get to the actual day-to-day task boards and checklists. We're talking specifically about the Flare AMS part, the central, the cloud portion here for those who use it. This can be a lifesaver for distributed teams, but people confuse these two things because they're both in the product. So painting with a super broad brush, the tasks board, that establishes your major milestones, the things that are measurable, they're assignable. Larry, I need you to write topic 24. It needs to be started no earlier than, date X, because you need information coming out of an engineering meeting, but it must be done by date Y. And I'm assigning you 8 hours of schedule time to write that topic. I mean, that's the purpose of the tasks board. Your major, trackable milestones. It's your big picture project tracking. But then we get into checklists. This is getting into the minutia, the day-to-day details. This is how we establish an order of operations or a workflow. And this is also how we make sure that nothing is ever overlooked or forgotten. For example, I worked with a customer that was having all kinds of trouble because all they had was this kind of oral tradition that got shared around. It's like, look, do not send this file to translation until it has been through both peer review and technical review. But half the time, topics will end up short-circuiting the system. It might finish peer review and boom, it gets sent off to translation, but then something fails technical review. And now they end up having to repay to retranslate the topic they've already paid to translate. So how do we formalize this process? Well, that is where a checklist comes in. Now, hopping over into the central interface, there we go. So for those who haven't seen it before, this is that MadCap Central homepage interface. Now, ignore mine. Mine's crazy busy because I've merged a couple of different things together here on my desktop. Basically, this top left report is more for a manager. This middle report would be more for a team lead. These little square boxes would be more for day-to-day author. So I've got kind of a crazy amalgamation here. But back to the slide, the big picture items, the tasks, this would typically be used by the team lead or potentially the manager. And here's where we can go in, we can create new tasks, new major milestones, right? Topic 576. We can set a priority, we can set a start date, we can set a due date, we can assign how many hours it's going to take. We can even add notes, we can make attachments. Maybe there's a PDF of reference material the author's going to need. There's a discussion area. I can add comments. Make sure you talk to Sally from engineering. They're going to hash some of these details out next week. But this is an official task. So when I save this, this is going to update the task bar. So right topic 576, I did add that, but just as important, notice the task activity panel on the right, it just told the rest of the team, I'm not working in a vacuum now. Mike Hamilton created the task right topic 576. Then, let's say this was assigned to me, and the day comes that I need to start this task. I can just drag this task over into the in progress column, and boom, it just sent out a note to the whole team. Mike Hamilton is now writing task 576. He moved it to in progress. So again, this is a neat way that you're not working in that vacuum anymore. You know what the rest of your teammates are working on, and the rest of your teammates know what you are working on at any given moment. But again, this is really big picture. They have no idea what I'm doing on topic 576. They know I've started, but am I in the research phase? Am I writing? Am I pulling screenshots? That level of detail, that minutia, that is when we get into checklists. And for checklists, I want to switch over to the Projects tab. Once I'm on the Projects tab, then I can pull up checklists. And I happen to have one I created here. And where that task board is pretty much set in stone, you create your own checklists. And you're not stuck with this one that I created. This is just for demonstration purposes. But the checklist I created, I've added a research phase, author text, screenshots and artwork, indexing, peer review, technical review, and if we scroll to the right, localization. So those were the major milestones in my fictional workflow. Question, can you rename or add task categories? Oh, absolutely. Can you filter on just your assigned tasks? Oh, yes, absolutely. There's tons of filtering and faceting that's built in. Again, I was showing more of that kind of manager or team lead view. If you're an individual writer, then you can actually filter and say, hey, I only want to see things assigned to me. Lots of slicing and dicing of the data. But the other thing to point out in here is notice that some of these have a blue check. Well, that indicates that these steps have been completed, but then there's one that's kind of a dot. So here I can see that procedure template is currently undergoing peer review. That's in progress, where it has already been indexed, it's had its screenshot. So that's what these little icons indicate. And this, you're able to track every single topic, every single file in the entire project. And really for the author, you care more about these tracking dots. But let's say the team lead, they can come in here and get this summary up at the top, and kind of holistically on the project, I can see how many topics have completed research, how many topics have completed authoring, how many topics have completed their artwork, and on and on and on. It's just a much more detailed, more granular look into the day-to-day authoring that, quite honestly, the manager usually doesn't care about this. They care more about the task board, but this gets more into the individual author or the team lead level of tracking. But again, I'm getting too deep. We're running out of time rapidly here. The whole goal of this is to stay in touch with what your remote working team members are doing. If, my buddy Jennifer, I know she's working on a topic, well, I can just drill down, find the topic that Jennifer is working on, and I can see exactly what phase that Jennifer is in at any given point in time. And as the question came in, I created this checklist, so I just arbitrarily chose these labels. If you guys have a simple workflow, maybe it's only 4 steps, you can create your own checklist that's only 4 columns with 4 of your own labels. Maybe it's, start, author, review. Maybe that's as formal as you guys get. You could have that as your checklist. All right, but we've really beat that one up. That's pretty much all of the front best practices I would recommend. So we have our checklists, we have our templates, we have our style. Oh, another question. Do we have a template that could be used for a style guide? At this moment, we do not. I'll just leave it at this moment we don't. It is something you would have to create. How do you manage peer or technical review? Oh, I'm glad you asked that question, because now we get into the live workflow. So everything I talked about previously, that was all getting set up. Gosh, that's 1/3, and we've used up 2/3 of our time. I'm going to pick up the pace here. Okay, so distributed team workflow. First thing, I'm not going to belabor this, but one of the neat things about getting into Central, it makes you independent of that IT bottleneck. We're no longer waiting on IT to spin up databases. We're not waiting on IT to set up sites on the web server we can publish to. We can take care of ourselves now because Central is already pre-optimized and pre-configured. Exactly what was just asked. How do we accommodate live review and feedback cycles? And then here is where I have to admit, author collaboration. There's an official Flare way, and there's a crazy Mike way, and I'm going to share both. And then what if we do need localization and translation, but working remotely has just wrecked our process? Is there any way that the authoring and management system could help out in that regard? So 4 areas we will look at for live workflow. So that independent of IT resources, the central component, the cloud component, already has pre-configured your cloud storage and your source control database functionality. So you no longer have to go down and request, hey, IT gatekeeper, I need a new database set up. Oh, we'll get to that in 3 weeks. There's none of that anymore. You just create a new Flare project, you connect your Flare project with Central and upload it, and boom, Central automatically creates a brand new storage database and docks it in. Automated build processing. Once you have your content in the cloud, you don't even have to do builds on your own local machine anymore. You can actually schedule builds to occur on the MadCap servers using the MadCap hardware. Automated publishing. Now, again, this gets a little detail-y, but you could tell Flare, well, not only do I want you to build a particular target at midnight tonight, but I want you, once it's finished, to automatically push that to the live website. And that gets into the content hosting as well. But the whole idea here, every single one of these 4 bullets represents kind of a block point by some some external entity outside of our department. These are all 4 things that can cause delays if we're waiting on the web team, if we're waiting on the IT department. And the nice thing, we gain self-sufficiency on all 4 of these items with Central, that's part of that authoring and management system. All right, now, just to go back and just demonstrate some of that, because I don't want to just wave my hands and have you just believe me, but under the Projects tab, here you can see that we have like 3 dozen Flare projects that have all been pushed up into this Central account. There is no pre-configuring, there is no extra work. All you do is just create a Flare project. Once your Flare project has been fleshed out and you're ready, okay, I want to put this in the cloud, we can then go to the Central tab, log in to our Central account, and then I literally have an upload button. Now I can't upload this one because it's already been uploaded, but once you click that upload button, that triggers Central to create a new database, a new source control area for this new project to be stored in. Only one author does that. From that day forward, the rest of the team can just access that Flare project from that cloud storage. And now it's automatically going to have the rollback capabilities, the version control capabilities, all of that built in. So completely painless. But the one that was asked for earlier, that review feedback cycle. Can you branch yet? Yes, right from within the Flare interface, you can do branching. You can not only create new branches, but you can merge previous branches back into the trunk. All right, one of the sticky wickets has always been review process. Using XML is great for the authoring team. It's horrible for everybody else. If I send a collection of 6 XML files to a subject matter expert, they're going to call me up and ask me what I've been smoking. They do not know what to do with XML files. So by switching to a cloud-based content review, your subject matter experts do not need any special tools installed, and just as importantly, they do not need any special technical knowledge. They don't even have to know how to spell XML. Everything just happens in their web browser. So the process, you're authoring in Flare. You reach that point where you need, let's say, a peer review or a technical review. There is actually a button in the Flare interface, I'll show you in a minute, that says send for review. So you initiate the review within Flare. The reviewer is going to get an email. Hey, Mike Hamilton would like you to review topic 24. And there's a link. If they click that link, the entire review process is going to occur in their web browser. But here's the really cool part. If you open your web browser, you can actually see them doing the review or the edit in real time. You can, I don't want to say you're spying. Let's say you're collaborating with them. You're not spying, but I can actually watch the reviewer. Every time they press a key on their keyboard, I'm seeing it show up on the screen. So you're literally real time watching this happen. All of the track changes data is captured right inside their browser. And then when they're done, they click a submit button. It will now open up back in your copy of Flare. And just like in like a word processor, you can then accept or reject any of that track changes data that was added to that topic during the review process. Question, can multiple reviewers comment simultaneously? Yes, and their comments will be in different colors with different initial markers in the track changes area. Let's get to, this sounds like this is what's really interesting to people. So let's get to this live. All right, so I'm in my copy of Flare. And I want someone to review even this teeny tiny little introduction topic. I go to the review tab and I click the send for review button. That's going to zip up all 5 of these XML files into a single review package. I want to check the radio button, send to MadCap Central. And now Flare is going to communicate with Central, and it's going to bring back a list of available reviewers. And let's say I want Jennifer to review this. And I could check multiple reviewers if I wanted to, but I'm going to keep it simple. I'll just pick Jennifer. And now when I click send, that's going to cause Central to send Jennifer an email saying, hey, you need to review this. Now, I don't have access to Jennifer's account, so I am going to fake this a little bit. So here is the file that I sent to Jennifer. Over here on the right, subject matter expert, Jennifer Morse, review status open. So Jennifer is still reviewing this, but you can see the track changes data. Jennifer has this little lightweight editor. She can go in, she can make any edits that she thinks are necessary. She's doing it all inside of her web browser. But all that Jennifer is seeing is this side over here. I mentioned that you could actually watch the review happening. Well, that's the interface that I've opened here. If you look over here on the right area, I'm on the reviews tab. I went to the sent sub tab, and here is that introduction topic that I sent to Jennifer. So with this interface, I can actually watch Jennifer in real time do her edits. And this is also how multiple reviewers could collaborate simultaneously. They would just have different initial markers over here on the right-hand column. Man, lots of questions flying in. Oh, do. Is there a way for SMEs to create content rather than just review it? Today, In the cloud, not quite yet. We do have a desktop tool, kind of a lighter weight version, not full flare, it's called Contributor. But I know I'm not supposed to say forward-looking announcements, but obviously the goal is to move all of that functionality into Central as well. Your question is just a release or two ahead of reality. Can review packages be assigned to specific SMEs in Central? Yes, that was that little checklist box that popped up in the beginning. You've been having a challenge with reviewers trying to modify tables. If that's being problematic, that's a quick phone call to support. That should be functional. If it's not working, we need to get support involved on that one. If it's an operator error, we'll get that sorted out. If it's a bug in the system, then we'll get that sorted out on our end. All right, man, we're going long here. I hate to do that. All right, so that was the review process. We'll put that away. Then author collaboration. Now, officially in Flare, you can turn that track changes on inside Flare as well. And then after you do a commit or a push up to the database, then any of your colleagues can then open your topic. They can see your track changes data, and then they could add their own track changes data. So the way that looks in Flare, I can have a topic open, and I can turn on track changes just like I would in Microsoft Word or any other editor. And maybe I don't like the word fictional. I want that to be fake. So I overwrite it. And again, it does that little track changes data. Now, if I do a save all and I go to source control and I do a push, I push this edit up into the cloud. Well, then one of my colleagues could open this topic. They could see my track changes data and they could comment and say, no, I like it to be fictional. It sounds more, we could actually argue back and forth using this track. The problem I have with that is it's linear. It's not synchronous. It's not real time. So yes, that has been in Flare for years and years, that functionality. But one of my favorite things to do is kind of hack the system. So this is unofficially that same review process we used for subject matter experts. I'll just kick off a review, but instead of sending it to a subject matter expert, I'll send it to one of my colleagues who already has Flare. Then we can use that browser interface. I can phone them up and we can have a discussion and we can collaborate in our browser in real time versus kind of that asynchronous mode of doing it via track changes in the Flare editor. But that's like two options. Maybe that asynchronous mode works better for you because your colleague is in a different continent and the time zones don't match up. Or if you want something that's more real time, then you could use that browser-based review process. Question, can SMEs work with conditioned content in Central with variables and snippets? All right, I'm getting a little bit out of my depth here because I haven't tried some of that recently. So I hope I don't get this wrong, but to my understanding, if there is conditionalized content already in the topic, then yes, they can modify that conditionalized content. I do not believe at this time that an SME could apply a condition tag if it wasn't already there. That's my understanding. I could be completely wrong on that. So if I am, my apologies. I will take that as a homework assignment to look up. I'll make sure that I update your question because these questions do end up getting answered and published along with the recording. So to my knowledge, if it's already in the topic, they will be able to work with it, but I don't believe they'd be able to add one that wasn't already in the topic, not in that simplified browser interface. All right, now localization translation. Basically, if your work from home strategies have wrecked your current workflow, then there is a way right from inside of the authoring management system, right inside that central product. We pull it back up. There is a translation tab, and you can literally say, hey, MadCap software, you have a department called Mad Translations that can do all of the localization through the cloud. How about giving us a quote on this content? And there's no obligation. You know, maybe you don't like our quote, maybe you want to stick with your current, but that's also built in. I know a lot of customers like going that route because now they don't have to manage the process anymore. Since MadCap understands this cloud system intimately, as your topics are marked complete, we can immediately start doing the translation on those topics. You don't have to ask us to do it once that's in place. All right, so that's going to bring us to the final session. About 5 more minutes will be done. So once we have a remote system in place, how do we measure success? How do we do analytics? And this throws people because a lot of people will ask, hey, does AMS have analytics? Well, not only do we have analytics, we have 3 different kinds. So there are internal analytics. What is the health of my authoring project? Do I have broken links that need to be repaired? Do we have styles that are undefined? You know, maybe there's a topic that says, hey, this is supposed to be styled as a note, but there's nothing in the style sheet called note. That will show up in the internal analytics. So any kind of technical issues with your projects, we're going to find. There are also management analytics. So your boss can say, okay, how many topics are complete? You know, what percentage finished is this project? So those ongoing kind of product or project management analytics. But then third, what most people think of as analytics, the external analytics. What topics are being viewed? How often are they being viewed? What searches are people performing? So all 3 of those levels of analytics are included. And that's one of my favorite things about Central is if we pull Central back up, that cluttered homepage I was showing at the very beginning. Well, this top box, that's that managerial level analytics. At a glance with these color codes, I can see, you know, what's complete, what's in progress, what's to do, big picture. So that's a representation of my task board. But if you're a team lead, well, here's a graphical representation of my checklist. So I can see the research phase, the author phase, the screenshots phase, the index phase. But if I'm a day-to-day author and I care more about the health of my project, well, here I can see my project has 3 undefined condition tags. We have 10 broken links. So yes, there are reports you can run that will extract that information, but I can set my dashboard up to just show me that information. So maybe I'm under the assumption we don't have any broken links, so I don't need to, oh, wait, I have 10. Where did those come? So it's a great dashboard. So that's kind of the project analysis analytics. But then if we get down to the customer-based analytics, well, yes, I can see what topics are being viewed. I can see how many times they're being viewed. I can see searches that people are performing. I can see Hey, what browsers are my customers using? What versions of those browsings? What operating systems are they coming in from? So all of your usual analytics. All right, so that's going to wrap things up. I went over time. My apologies. But to summarize, so best practices in setting up, have a style guide, set up your own templates, both for topics and for publishing, set up your single sourcing metadata in advance, minimize that ad hoc creation, and then use your or set up your task board and your checklists in advance so that everybody knows the prescribed workflow. Then once we get to the live work, the first point is just that we're self-sufficient now, but the integrated review and feedback cycles and the localization and translation possibilities really enable that work from home model. And then under measurement, the key thing was to point out that there are 3 different types of analytics. There's health of the content, health of the project. There's are we on time, are we on budget analytics. And then there's the external, hey, are my pages being viewed? What searches are being done? External type analytics. So with that, just one announcement. If some of this was interesting, but you haven't explored Central and the full AMS yet, there is a discount running right now. Anybody who signs on, they're just lumping in 3 months for free on top of your normal subscription. For more details, just reach out to your salesperson. But then we are going to get into questions. So I realize I went off long. I know some people had to drop off. You'll still get the recording, but I'm going to go back through the Q&A window, see if there was anything that I missed. Oh, I see a question came in. Is there a way to prevent a SME from changing some content? I'm paraphrasing there. There is supposed to be. I will be honest, I have not tested this myself, but inside of Flare, you can do what's known as field locking. Now, what does that mean? Let me go ahead and open up a topic here, see if I can find a big one. And of course, I find a little one. Well, I'm going to fake this. All right, so I've got all these subsections. If for some reason, before I send this to a subject matter expert, I want to lock this heading 2 and this paragraph. If you go to the review tab, there is this little item labeled lock. If I click lock, that just put a weird gray background on that content. Now, I'm not going to take the time to go through the whole review process. I'm not sure I have time to do that. But theoretically, if I now send this file to review, the reviewer will be locked out of editing anything I put that gray background on. Now, I have about an 80% quality factor that that's going to work through Central. The reason I'm holding 20% back is only because I haven't done this recently enough to say, absolutely, this is going to work. I know it used to work. I've used it, but I haven't used it in probably 18 months or so. So that is the plan. You can go to the review page, highlight content, click lock. Now, this will not lock out other Flare authors. If somebody is a Flare author, they can still edit the locked content. But these locks are supposed to lock this content from subject matter experts. So give that a try. If it doesn't work, which it should, But if it doesn't, then reach out to support. All right, going back, looking at questions. Can I generate multiple PDFs from Central? Oh, absolutely. You can set up Central to say, hey, starting at midnight, build these 42 targets for me. That is fully supported. All right, looking through, I think that's I think those are the two that I missed. Everything else, I think I answered live. So with that, thank you so much, everybody. I hope this webinar was helpful for you. Again, it probably won't happen immediately, but probably by tomorrow-ish, there will be a link up on our website linking to this webinar, linking to the slide deck that I used. So if this was interesting, if you want to review some of it, if you want to share it with a colleague, those assets will be up later. But with that, thank you so much. Have an awesome day and an even better rest of your week. Cheers, everybody.